Welcome to Recovery That Works with Pastor Mike Barnes. I am Mike Barnes, and I'm the pastor at Providence Evangelical Friends Church. And just want to share some things with you today about Step 3. We have a recovery meeting here at the church at 7 p.m. on Saturdays called Exchange Life Fellowship. Also, we have transitional homes for men making transition from incarceration or from rehab to give them an opportunity to learn how to live life soberly. So welcome. Glad you're here with us today. We're going to continue our discussion on Step 3. We made a decision to turn our life and our wills over to the care of God. In the previous sessions, we talked about life, we talked about will, and today we're going to talk about action. Life being our spiritual life, will being our choices. So let's talk about the action of turning our life and will over to the care of God. I want you to know that it is an action that I do out of my will. The way the step reads is, from a decision that I have made, I'm going to take the step of turning my life and will over to the care of God. Oftentimes in recovery, it doesn't matter what you're recovering from. We make a decision that we want to do something different, but oftentimes we don't follow through with it. And that is the general problem within recovery. Step 3 is essential, and it really is the first part of making that decision to turn my life and will over to the care of God, is the first action that I begin to take. Step 1, we just admit and acknowledge our powerlessness and our unmanageability in our life. Step 2, still key, we come to the realization that our only hope is our higher power. And then step 3, we begin to take on the process of turning my life and will over to his care. Step 1 says, I can't. Step 2 says, he can. Step 3 says, I'm going to let him. I'm going to take the actions to do that. And I want to give you some simple actions going forward in doing this. The first thing is, we talked quite a bit about higher power in one of the previous videos that deal with step 2. But I'm going to present this in such a way that we begin to see Jesus Christ as our higher power and what he expects us to do and how we turn our life and will over to his care. Sometimes we complicate this by different ways of looking at God or higher power. So I think when we make the decision to turn our life and will over to Jesus Christ, kind of simplifies it. And I'm hoping that I simplify it for you today. There are 3 parts to this: turn over in prayer, turn over worries, and accept process. And all of them kind of come from the theme verse, Bible verse, for step 3 in Christ-centered recovery. And that's what I teach. I teach Christ-centered recovery at Exchange Life Fellowship. I teach Christ-centered recovery to the men in our transitional homes. So let's begin by first reading this verse. Romans 12. Beginning in verse 1. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Key thing here, action. Offer your bodies as living sacrifices. Verse 2. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. The goal of Christ-centered recovery is not really all that hard to see. The goal is to see God's will lived out in my life. There's some things that we come to realize at this point in time in recovery that are not God's will. It's not God's will that I be addicted. It's not God's will that I struggle with tons of emotional problems and tension and worry and anxiety and fear. What God's will is that you live a life in which you begin to take the world as it is, not as you would have it. Now, we're going to talk more about how character defects affect this, but there's that initial idea of turning my life and will over to his care. So let's look at what we talked about. In the idea of presenting ourselves as living sacrifices, the first thing we have to look at is turning my life and will over to his care in prayer, okay? Prayer is an action. Prayer is something that connects me to God, which is key. Because in the process of turning my life and will over to his care, the first thing he wants is for me to be connected to him, obviously in a relationship. You know, one of the things that I find, particularly when I go to AA meetings, is when somebody has relapsed or went back out, or however you want to word it, and they come back in, and sometimes they'll pick up a white chip, and I've heard more than one person say, yeah, I understand what happened. I lost my conscious contact with God. Okay. And that is a true statement, depending on how you define God. But the first thing is he wants us to connect with him in prayer. That's how I start and maintain my relationship with him. One of the good things to do is, and I want to give you just some practical ways to apply this, is turning your will over to him in prayer and life and will over to him in prayer every day. Oftentimes, we have, and it is definitely recommended in AA, and I recommend it in our Christ-centered recovery program here, is to have what we refer to as a step 3 prayer. Now, you can look on the internet and you can find all kinds of step 3 prayers. But I would encourage you to write your own. It doesn't have to be anything elaborate. There's no test here, but it's something that begins to submit yourself to God. That is so key. The prayer can be something as simple as, God, I don't know what today holds, but you do. And whatever happens today, Lord, I want you to direct me, lead me, and guide me. And I want to turn my day and my life and my choices over to you. Simple prayer in a step 3 prayer. So we need to do that. Oftentimes in prayer, we spend a lot of time asking him for things or telling him to do things, which I don't think that's how it works, or instead of connecting with him in prayer. Connecting with him. I'm going to talk more about that when we get to the point of improving our conscious contact with him. But here's the key. Begin your day by turning your life and will over to his care. Somehow, however you choose to do that. But make sure that you verbalize that to him, because you're going to do two things. You're going to establish him as the Lord of your life, and you as the servant, and submit yourself to him. The key to the relationship with Jesus Christ is, number one, he is the master, and I am the servant. He has a will, he has a purpose for me, and for that will and purpose to be lived out in my life, it's done through a relationship with him. That's the first thing. Turn your life over to him in prayer. okay? And I would do this every single day. I do it. The first thing that I do in the morning is pray my prayer of submission and ask for his guidance. The second thing is to turn over our worries. Oftentimes, we are controlled by our worries. Sometimes our worries and our emotional tension that we go through keeps us from even focusing on God, let alone seeing his will lived out in our life. You know, we focus on worries. So here's a suggestion. And you get in the process of turning it over to him. The words that are often used is let go and let God. Quit holding on to them. Sometimes our worries, our anxieties, our emotional tension, even things that we struggle with, like chronic depression or whatever, when we allow those things, and we're allowing them to, they can affect my relationship with God. They can affect the way that I see him, because I see him through my struggles. So I must get in a habit of turning over my worries. Here's a suggestion. Make up a powerless list. It is a list of things that you are absolutely powerless over. It could be other people. It could be circumstances. It could be your job. It could even be your finances. Whatever you are worried about, take a moment to turn your life and will over to his care by giving him what you worry about. Jesus said, don't worry about tomorrow. And this is also part of the process of living life one day at a time. Jesus says, don't worry about tomorrow. Who has added 1 hour to their life by worry? Don't worry about what tomorrow brings. Live your life one day at a time. When I begin to turn my life and will over to his care, some of these phrases that we even learn in recovery, like one day at a time, we can begin to live them out. But make up a powerless list of things that are controlling you or worrying you or affecting you, and pray over that list every day, giving it to God, asking him to remove the worry, asking him to remove anything that keeps you from focusing on him, even asking him to impact them. Sometimes we don't have because we don't ask. God, help me with my finances. God, help me with my emotional tension. But I want to give it to you, Lord. I don't want the things that I worry about in this life to affect my relationship with you. And pray over that list each day. Add it to your prayer list. Sometimes the list will grow. Sometimes the list may get smaller. But if there's one area that we have an opportunity to see God at work, it is in this idea of worry. He does not want you to worry. He doesn't want you to worry. He understands the struggles of worry. And in this process, you may need to turn over the things that you can't change. Also, the other part of this is we are beginning to get serenity from God. Serenity is a peace that can be God-given. That's even what the serenity prayer states. Oh, that we could live it out. Lord, help me to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, wisdom to know the difference, okay? I'm beginning to do that when I start making up my powerless list and praying over it. All right, the last thing is accept. It's an action. Each one of these are verbs. Turn, accept the process. This may be the toughest one because in step 3, I really begin to open myself up to the process of recovery. Because what's going to follow are actions that I need to take that are going to help me with my emotional health and affect me and help me with underlying factors of addiction. So I have to begin to accept the process. Sometimes we just need to open up our mind that much to begin to open our minds up to the process. So that's the next thing. I got to accept the process. In our text, the word Paul writes, the Apostle Paul writes, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world. That's key, because we're going to talk about that in a second. Some things need to change. Oftentimes, recovery is like a series of either relapses or falling back into old patterns of behavior. And we conform to that. Without any kind of change in my life, that's normally the course of action. And we begin to be like this material that's being poured into a mold, and when the mold is flipped, same guy keeps coming out. Why? Because the same material is being poured into the same mold at the same time. But he goes on to say, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That is the key part of this verse. To understand that when I begin to change my way of thinking, when I renew my mind, it leads to transformation. Now, I want to make something really clear here. The key to recovery is transformation by God. That is the one changing thing that can affect you in every way. He wants to transform you, not to just change a few things. So transformation is important. The word transformation there comes from the Greek word metamorpho, which is the scientific term metamorphosis, okay? Meaning one thing becoming another. A tadpole becoming a frog, a caterpillar becoming a fly. That's how the scientific term is used. But he says the way that happens is not some natural process. We don't naturally recover. There's actions that we need to do in accepting the process. He says that it is done by the renewing of your mind. First off, that renewing means not just changing a few things, but changing the way I think, but also changing what information I put into it. That is accepting the process of discipleship. Step 3 opens up that door. When we begin to really work step 3 and accept the process, that means becoming a disciple of Jesus Christ. I realize this takes many forms, but I'm going to talk about some of the things that may need to change that can help to facilitate this process. Renewing my mind, changing the way I think, changing what I'm doing. You know, one of the things that they will often say in recovery, and I believe them, is that we need to change people, places, and things. And that's true. But what we change them to is really important. If you've made a decision that you're over whatever it is you're struggling with, and you're willing to turn your life and will over to his care, and you're willing to, as they say in AA, go to whatever lengths to attain it, that's when we are ready. Yes, we need to change people, places, and things. But what are we changing them to? Yeah, in turning my life and will over to the care of God, there may need to be some different people in my life. Yes, in turning my life and will over to God, there may be ideas of the places that I once went to need to change. And sure, there are things that I need to do. But I want to simplify that for you today as it relates to Christ-centered recovery. First thing is church. Now, I understand that in addiction, sometimes the addict feels on the outside when they go to church. Well, I get that. In AA, as it talks about the chapter on the agnostic, it says that we should not be afraid of religion. We shouldn't be afraid of it. And sometimes we have to overcome that fear to become part of a church. That does a couple different things. Number one, it puts us in a setting where we begin to learn about our higher power, Jesus Christ. Secondly, it begins to put people in my life that can help me. When we work step 3, we not only get God, but we get his people. And we need, and I want you to remember this, support for change. When someone comes to me who is struggling with an addiction or emotional problems, I will ask them questions like, what are you doing? Who do you have in your life? Where is your support for change? The second thing is what we are reading and looking at. Taking an opportunity to spend some time reading the Word. And also just some daily things, and turning our life and will over to his care, like daily reflection, AA, 24-hour-a-day book. Each of those books have sections in them that can help you in your recovery. The third thing is, and we're going to talk more about this when we begin to talk about step 4, is finding someone in your life to disciple you, or, recovery term, sponsor you, and be willing to listen to them. Okay? Sponsorship changed my life, whether it was being a sponsor or being sponsored. And especially when I took the opportunity to listen to men who were sponsoring me and working with me. So we take that step of being discipled. I prefer one-on-one discipleship. I prefer one-on-one sponsorship. I prefer those things. One of the things that I'm finding in AA is kind of an openness to not just having sponsors in AA, but what they call spiritual advisors. Now, that's a broad term, and it can mean a whole lot of things that can make you go sideways. But what it does mean is pastor, church leader, teacher. Someone that can teach you about your higher power. When I come to step 3, I have to understand that I need to know about my higher power. The more I know about him, the more he will work in my life. The text tells us once our mind is renewed and transformed, then we will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his perfect and pleasing will. Then we begin to see his will at work in our life. Many of us today know that where we're at today is not what a loving God has for us. But if we take the step to turn our life and will over to his care, things can change. Simple thing here in this idea of accepting the process. First thing is, where are you getting your information? Maybe you don't feel comfortable going to church. You could you could go to an AA meeting, NA meeting, be faithful to go. Or even something like our Christ-centered recovery group on Saturday nights, Exchange Life Fellowship. That can be where you get your information. That's key. Second thing is, in that idea of accepting the process, who are the people that you have in your life? Do you have people in recovery in your life that know something about recovery because they've experienced it themselves? Or are you filling your life with just people that make you feel good? Oftentimes in recovery, what we want is people that kind of will co-sign on who we are rather than work to lift us up. And the last thing is things. What are the things that you need to change? I'm just going to give you a short list. First thing, prayer. Daily prayer time. I gave you some ideas when we talked about turning over in God, in prayer. Prayer. Daily prayer time. Second thing is things. What are the activities that you are doing? Are the activities that you're doing kind of serving as triggers for you? When you go to certain places, do you feel your cravings kind of coming to the surface? You need to change those things. And then people. Who is in your life? Who is discipling you? Who is providing the support you need for change? Thank you so much for joining us today. We will continue next time. Please take an opportunity to share this video if you got something out of it. Maybe share it with a friend, tell someone about it. And if you live here in the Virginia Beach area and you want to come be a part of a recovery program, Exchange Life Fellowship, 7 o'clock on Saturdays. So, as we end today, I want to read once again our Serenity Prayer. And maybe this would be a good prayer for you to pray each day as well. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking as Jesus did the sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender. You make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Amen. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking this opportunity to watch this video. Feel free to contact me or the church. Church information will be seen here. God bless you and have a great day.